It all started with an envelope, a plain, cream-colored envelope that appeared in my mailbox one unremarkable afternoon. There was no return address, no stamp, and no indication of how it had gotten there. My name was written on the front in elegant, lupin handwriting, and when I flipped it over, I noticed a strange symbol pressed into the wax seal. It looked like an eye encased within a triangle, surrounded by intricate lines that almost resembled flames. At first, I thought it was some kind of prank. Who sends cryptic letters in this day and age? But something about the weight of the envelope and the care put into the seal intrigued me. I broke the wax with my thumb, unfolded the letter inside, and read the words that would change my life forever. You have been selected. Your curiosity has not gone unnoticed, and your skills make you an ideal candidate. Join us, and you will uncover truths that the rest of the world fears to confront. Come to the address below at precisely midnight. Come alone. The letter was unsigned, and the address listed was in the older part of the city, a district known for its crumbling buildings and eerie quiet after dark. My first thought was to throw it away, to ignore what was clearly some kind of hoax or, worse, a setup for something sinister. But the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that this was meant for me. You see, I've always had an unhealthy obsession with the unknown. Paranormal documentaries, urban legends, unsolved mysteries, they've fascinated me for as long as I can remember. I'd spent years dabbling in amateur ghost hunts and reading every obscure occult text I could get my hands on. The idea that someone had noticed my curiosity, that there might be a group out there who shared my obsession, was too tempting to resist. By the time midnight rolled around, I found myself standing outside the address listed on the letter. It was an old stone building with boarded-up windows and a crumbling facade. A faint glow leaked out from the cracks in the doorframe, and the same strange symbol from the envelope was etched into the heavy wooden door. I hesitated, the reality of what I was doing finally sinking in. What if this was a mistake? What if I was walking into some kind of trap? But something in the back of my mind urged me forward. I raised a trembling hand and knocked 3 times as the letter had instructed. The door creaked open almost instantly, revealing a dimly lit hallway lined with flickering lanterns. A man stood in the doorway, his face hidden by a dark hood. He didn't speak, just nodded and motioned for me to follow. As I stepped inside, the air grew colder, and a faint hum vibrated through the walls, like the building itself was alive. The hooded man led me through a maze of hallways and staircases, each one more dimly lit and narrow than the last. Finally, we emerged into a large, circular room at the center of the building. The room was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with ancient tomes and artifacts. A massive, circular table sat in the middle, surrounded by a dozen figures, all dressed in similar dark robes. The air smelled of burning sage and something metallic, like blood. One of the figures at the table stood and lowered their hood, revealing a woman with piercing gray eyes and a face that seemed both ageless and weary. "Welcome," she said, her voice low and commanding. "We've been watching you for some time." Before I could respond, she gestured to an empty chair at the table. "Sit," she said. "You've been chosen for a reason, and it's time for you to understand what that means." I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn and run. But curiosity won out, as it always did. I sat down, the wooden chair creaking beneath me, and the other members of the society lowered their hoods, their faces illuminated by the flickering candlelight. "We are the seekers of the veil," the woman said, her eyes locking onto mine. "Our mission is to uncover the truths hidden beyond this world, to confront the forces that others fear, and to protect humanity from what it cannot understand." Her words sent a chill down my spine, but at the same time, I felt an undeniable pull, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. She slid a small black book across the table toward me. Its leather cover was cracked with age, and the symbol from the envelope was embossed on the front. "Read this," she said, "and if you choose to stay, know that there are rules. Rules that cannot be broken, no matter the cost." I opened the book, my hands trembling, and the pages were filled with strange symbols and cryptic text. My heart raced as I realized that this wasn't just some secret club or eccentric hobby group. These people had access to knowledge far beyond anything I had ever imagined. But what they didn't tell me that night, what I would soon come to learn, was that knowledge came at a price. The book they gave me was like nothing I'd ever seen. Its pages weren't filled with ordinary text, but symbols, diagrams, and strange flowing scripts that seemed almost alive. I couldn't make sense of any of it, but the leader of the society, the woman with the piercing gray eyes, assured me that understanding would come in time. "For now," she said, "all you need to do is follow instructions." That night was my initiation. I wasn't given much time to think about it or even to prepare myself. After handing me the book, the woman, who introduced herself only as Marin, gestured for the other members to stand. They formed a circle around the room, their dark robes blending with the shadows. The air seemed to hum with an energy I couldn't quite place, like static electricity before a storm. Marin placed a small candle in front of me and handed me a match. "Light it," she said, her voice calm but firm. I struck the match, my hand shaking slightly, and the tiny flame danced to life. As I lit the candle, the hum in the room grew louder, almost resonating in my chest. "Repeat after me," Marin said, her eyes locking onto mine. "I seek the truth, no matter the cost. I walk the veil to protect the world beyond. I bind myself to the rules, for they are my salvation." I hesitated for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in, but with the eyes of the entire society on me, I repeated the phrase. "I seek the truth, no matter the cost. I walk the veil to protect the world beyond. I bind myself to the rules, for they are my salvation." The moment I finished, the candle's flame flared, burning brighter than any flame should. A sudden gust of cold air swept through the room, extinguishing the light and plunging us into darkness. For a moment, I thought it was over, but then I heard the whispers. They weren't coming from the other members of the society. These whispers were faint, disjointed, and otherworldly. They came from all around me, overlapping and echoing in a language I couldn't understand. My skin prickled as the air grew colder, and I felt something brush against my arm. Something I couldn't see. "Do not move," Marin said sharply, her voice cutting through the whispers. "This is part of the initiation. They're testing you." "Who's testing me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. But Marin didn't answer. She simply stared at me, her expression unreadable. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I felt a crushing weight settle over me, like invisible hands pressing down on my shoulders. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I saw shapes in the darkness, vague, shadowy figures with glowing eyes circling the room. "Stay still," Marin repeated, her tone like steel. "You must not show fear." Easier said than done. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to stay rooted to the spot. The whispers reached a crescendo, and one voice broke through the others, clear, deep, and filled with something that felt like both authority and malice. "Do you accept the price of the truth?" the voice asked. I looked at Maren, searching for guidance, but she gave me nothing. This was my decision, my test. "Yes," I said, my voice shaking. "I accept." The room fell silent. The weight lifted from my shoulders and the whispers vanished as suddenly as they'd begun. The candle relit itself, its flame steady and bright. The other members of the society lowered their heads, and Maren gave me the faintest hint of a smile. "You've passed," she said simply. "Welcome to the Seekers of the Veil." But the relief I felt was short-lived. Maren placed a hand on my shoulder and leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The initiation is the easy part," she said. "The rules are what will keep you alive. Break them, and the veil will consume you." She handed me another piece of paper, this one filled with a list of rules. As I read them, my unease deepened. Never look into the mirror in the southern hall. Do not speak to anyone you see after midnight unless you're certain they are human. If you hear your name whispered, do not respond. Always leave the building before sunrise. If you see the figure in white, run. The rules were eerily specific, and they raised more questions than they answered. "What happens if I break one of these?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Maren's expression darkened. "Pray that you never find out." That night, as I left the Society's headquarters, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just crossed a line I could never return from. The air outside felt heavier, darker, as though the world itself had shifted. I clutched the rule sheet tightly. The words burned into my mind. What they hadn't told me yet was that the rules weren't just guidelines, they were warnings, and I was about to find out exactly why they existed. After the initiation, I didn't sleep much. The rules Maren had given me replayed in my mind like a broken record, each one gnawing at my curiosity and fear. Why can't I look into the mirror in the southern hall? What happens if someone whispers my name? And the figure in white? What is it? The unknown was unbearable, and the cryptic warnings only made it worse. I thought my first mission would come days, maybe weeks later, giving me time to adjust. But less than 24 hours after my initiation, I received a text message from an unknown number. It read, "Your first task awaits. Be at 1136 Windmere Lane by midnight. Do not be late." I stared at the message, my stomach twisting into knots. Windmere Lane was on the outskirts of town, an area I knew was mostly abandoned. The few buildings still standing were old and decaying, remnants of a neighborhood that had been deserted decades ago. I had a bad feeling about this, but I couldn't back out now. I was in too deep. When I arrived, the house at 1136 Windmere Lane was exactly as I'd imagined. An ancient, crumbling structure with boarded-up windows and a sagging roof. Vines snaked up the walls, and the entire property seemed to exude an aura of decay and unease. The only sign of life was a faint, flickering light visible through the cracks in the boards covering the front windows. As I stepped out of my car, I spotted Maren standing on the porch, her dark coat blending into the shadows. She greeted me with a nod, her expression unreadable as always. "You're on time. That's good," she said. "Punctuality is important." "Why am I here?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "You're here to learn," she replied, "and to prove you can follow the rules when it matters most." She handed me a small leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with scrawled notes and diagrams I couldn't make sense of. "There's something inside this house," she explained, her tone as calm as if she were giving me directions to the grocery store. "Something trapped between our world and the next. Your job is to observe. Do not interact, no matter what you see or hear. And above all," she fixed me with a piercing gaze, "do not stay past 3 a.m. I wanted to ask more, but before I could, she stepped off the porch and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me alone. My heart raced as I stared at the house. This is it, I thought. My first mission. The inside of the house was worse than the outside. The air was thick with dust, and every floorboard creaked beneath my weight. The flickering light I'd seen from outside came from a single lantern in the foyer, its weak glow casting long, shifting shadows across the walls. I clutched the notebook tightly, its weight oddly comforting as I ventured deeper into the house. The first half hour was uneventful, though the oppressive atmosphere made it feel much longer. I wandered from room to room, jotting down notes about what I saw. The house was in disarray, furniture overturned, mirrors shattered, strange symbols carved into the walls. At one point, I found a pile of old tattered clothing in a corner, as if someone had shed them and vanished. But then, just as the clock struck 2 a.m., things began to change. It started with a faint sound, like distant footsteps echoing through the empty halls. I froze, my grip tightening on the notebook, and strained to listen. The steps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside the room I was in. My breath caught in my throat as I heard a faint knock on the doorframe. "Jason," a voice whispered, soft and melodic. My blood turned to ice. "Do not respond. Do not respond," I repeated in my mind. I kept my eyes fixed on the notebook in my hands, refusing to look up. "Jason," the voice called again, this time more insistent. It was familiar, too familiar. It sounded like my mother's voice, though I knew that was impossible. My hands shook, and I fought the urge to answer. The voice grew louder, angrier. "Jason, look at me." I clenched my teeth and stayed silent, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. After what felt like an eternity, the voice stopped, and the air in the room grew still again. I exhaled shakily and glanced at the clock on the wall. 2:34 a.m. I still had 26 minutes to go. As I continued through the house, the paranormal activity intensified. Shadows moved in ways that didn't make sense, and the air grew colder with every step I took. At one point, I turned a corner and saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was draped in white, its form shifting and flickering like static on a broken television. The figure in white. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing through the halls as the whispers returned, louder and more frantic than before. They overlapped, incomprehensible and maddening, urging me to stop, to turn around, to give in. By the time I burst through the front door and into the night, my lungs burned and my hands were trembling. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. As I slammed the door shut, I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 2:59 a.m. I had made it out, barely. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something behind, or that something had followed me. I barely slept after the first mission. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure in white. Its shifting, flickering form burned into my mind like a warning. The whispers from the house lingered in my ears, faint and fragmented, as though they had followed me home. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, the residue of fear clinging to me, but deep down, I knew better. The next day, Maren called. Her voice on the other end of the line was calm, almost casual, as though nothing unusual had happened the night before. "You survived," she said, her tone betraying a hint of approval. "That's good. Most don't." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Most don't? What had I gotten myself into? "Marin," I said, my voice shaken, "I need answers. What was that thing in the house? Why was it calling my name? And why the hell does this society have so many rules?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Marin finally spoke, her voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "The truth is, the society isn't what you think it is. It's not just about studying the paranormal. It's about containment, Jason, about keeping things in check." "Keeping what in check?" I pressed, my stomach knotting with dread. She sighed. "There are entities, forces that exist beyond our understanding. Most of the world is blissfully unaware of them, but some of us, people like you and me, we see them. The veil separates their world from ours, but it's thin in places, and when it tears, things slip through. Our job is to make sure they don't wreak havoc." My mind reeled at her explanation. "And the rules? The rules are there to keep you alive," Marin said firmly. "The entities don't follow our logic or reason. They're drawn to specific actions, specific mistakes. The rules are boundaries. Cross them, and you invite them in." I thought back to the house, to the figure in white, and the way it had seemed to materialize when I turned that corner. What happens if you break a rule? Her silence was answer enough. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about the society's true purpose. The idea of entities slipping through the veil and preying on our world was terrifying. But what unsettled me even more was the realization that we weren't just observers. We were gatekeepers, tasked with holding back something vast and unknowable. As I sifted through the leather-bound notebook Marin had given me, I stumbled upon a series of notes that didn't make sense at first glance. They were scrawled hastily, almost frantically, and they mentioned a ritual gone wrong, and a name that sent a chill down my spine. The White One. The notes were vague, but they described a failed attempt to seal something within the veil. According to the scribbles, a group of seekers had conducted a ritual years ago, but one of them had broken the rules, allowing an entity to escape. The descriptions were fragmented, but one detail stood out. The entity took the form of a figure in white, flickering like static, and it called the names of those it wanted to claim. I felt my stomach drop. The figure in the house, the one I had narrowly escaped, wasn't just a random apparition. It was the White One, and it had been let loose because someone had broken the rules. My hands trembled as I flipped through the notebook, searching for more information. There were sketches of strange symbols, diagrams of what appeared to be portals, and cryptic warnings written in bold letters. "Do not answer the call. Do not look directly at it for more than 3 seconds. Do not allow it to step beyond the threshold." I slammed the book shut, my heart racing. The society wasn't just containing these entities, it was cleaning up its own messes. The next time I saw Marin, I confronted her. We met at the society's headquarters, the dimly lit room feeling more claustrophobic than usual. "You knew what was in that house," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You sent me in there without telling me the truth." Marin didn't flinch. "I told you what you needed to know to survive," she said. "You passed the test, didn't you?" "This isn't a game," I snapped. "You're putting people's lives on the line, mine included. And for what? To clean up a mistake someone else made?" Her expression darkened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in her steely gray eyes. "We don't have the luxury of regret," she said quietly. "The veil is fragile, Jason. If we don't act, these entities will consume everything. Yes, mistakes were made. Yes, lives were lost. But we don't have the option to walk away. Neither do you." I stared at her, my anger giving way to a sinking realization. I couldn't walk away, even if I wanted to. The rules, the rituals, the veil itself, they were all part of something much bigger than me, and I was bound to it now. Maren placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip firm. "You're stronger than you think," she said, "but remember, the rules exist for a reason. If you break them, you won't just put yourself in danger, you'll put the entire world at risk." Her words hung heavy in the air as she turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the flickering candlelight. I didn't know it then, but she was right. The rules were the only thing keeping the veil intact, and I was about to learn just how high the stakes really were. The next mission came sooner than I expected. Barely 2 days had passed since my confrontation with Maren when I received another message. "Report to headquarters immediately. Bring the notebook. This is urgent." The message sent a shiver down my spine. Something about the word urgent felt wrong, like it carried a weight that went beyond the usual secrecy of the society. I grabbed the notebook and drove to the headquarters, my thoughts racing. The night was darker than usual, the moon obscured by thick clouds, and an uneasy silence seemed to blanket the city. When I arrived, the atmosphere inside the headquarters was tense. Maren was waiting for me in the main room, surrounded by several other members of the society. Their faces were grim, their robes drawn tight around their bodies as though they were bracing for a storm. "You're late," Maren said, her tone sharp. "I came as fast as I could," I replied, glancing around the room. "What's going on?" She gestured for me to sit at the table where a map of the city was spread out. A series of red circles had been drawn over specific locations, and one of them was directly over the house on Windmere Lane. "There's been a breach," Maren said, her voice low but urgent. "The veil at Windmere Lane is tearing, and the white one is growing stronger. It's begun appearing in other locations, and if we don't act now, it will spread beyond our ability to contain it." My stomach churned. The memory of the figure in white, its flickering form and glowing eyes, was still fresh in my mind. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, though I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. "You're going back," Maren said simply. My chest tightened. "Back to the house?" She nodded. "You've already encountered the white one and survived. That makes you uniquely qualified to deal with it." "Deal with it?" I echoed, my voice rising. "How exactly am I supposed to deal with something like that?" Maren slid the notebook across the table toward me, flipping it open to a page I hadn't seen before. It contained a series of symbols and a set of instructions written in precise, blocky handwriting. "This is a binding ritual," she explained. "It won't destroy the white one, but it will force it back behind the veil, at least for now. You'll need to perform it inside the house, at the location where the breach is strongest. That's likely the basement." The basement. Of course, it had to be the basement. "What happens if I fail?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Maren's expression darkened. "If you fail, the breach will grow, and the white one will have free rein to cross into our world. It won't stop until it consumes everything it touches." That night, I found myself standing once again in front of the decaying house on Windmere Lane. The air was colder than before, and the windows glowed faintly with an unnatural light. My heart pounded as I stepped through the door, clutching the notebook tightly. The house greeted me with the same oppressive atmosphere as before, but this time it felt worse. The whispers started almost immediately, soft at first but growing louder with each step I took. "Jason, come back. Stay with us. Open the door." I ignored them, repeating the rules in my head like a mantra. Do not respond. Do not look at it for more than 3 seconds. Do not stay past 3 a.m. I made my way to the basement door, which stood ajar as though it had been waiting for me. The air that seeped out from the dark stairwell was freezing, and the faint hum I had felt before was now a low, pulsing vibration that resonated in my chest. As I descended the stairs, the whispers grew deafening, overlapping in a chaotic cacophony that made my head throb. The basement was even darker than the rest of the house, but the faint glow of the white one illuminated the far corner of the room. It stood there, flickering and shifting, its hollow eyes locked onto me. I swallowed hard and opened the notebook, my hands trembling as I began to draw the symbols on the floor in chalk. The instructions were clear. I had to complete the binding circle before the white one moved. But it didn't make it easy. The moment I started, it began to move toward me, its form flickering faster and faster. The whispers turned into screams, incomprehensible and furious, as the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath came in shallow gasps as I worked, my fingers numb from the cold. "Jason!" it hissed, its voice cutting through the chaos. "Look at me." I clenched my teeth, refusing to meet its gaze, and continued drawing. The last symbol was the most complex, a twisting design that seemed to blur as I tried to replicate it. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the chalk. "Look at me." The white one's voice was louder now, more insistent. I finished the symbol and stepped back into the circle, clutching the notebook as I began to recite the binding incantation. The words felt foreign in my mouth, their weight heavy and unnatural. The white one screamed, its form flickering violently as the circle began to glow. Shadows writhed around it, clawing at the edges of the circle, but they couldn't cross. The room shook, the air filled with a deafening roar, and then silence. When I opened my eyes, the room was empty. The white one was gone. I stumbled out of the house just as the clock struck 3 a.m., my legs barely able to carry me. Maren was waiting for me outside, her expression unreadable. "You did well," she said simply, "but this isn't over." I didn't need her to tell me that. The veil was fragile, and now I knew just how easily it could tear. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The events of the night replayed in my mind on an endless loop: the oppressive whispers, the piercing gaze of the white one, the suffocating cold of the basement. I should have felt relieved. I had completed the ritual, sealed the breach, and survived. But instead, I felt hollow, like a piece of me had been left behind in that house. When I pulled into my driveway, the first rays of dawn were just beginning to break through the darkness. For the first time in hours, I felt a sliver of warmth, but it did little to ease the lingering chill in my bones. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the faint light on the horizon and wondering if I had truly escaped, or if the white one had simply let me go. The next few days were a blur. I avoided my phone, refused to check for messages from Maren or the society, and stayed holed up in my apartment with every light turned on. Sleep was elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that basement, hearing the whispers and feeling the oppressive weight of the veil pressing down on me. Sometimes I would wake up in a cold sweat, certain I had heard my name being called from the shadows of my room. It wasn't until the third night after the mission that I finally broke down and opened the notebook. I had shoved it into my bag after leaving the house and hadn't touched it since. But now, with the silence of the apartment pressing in around me, I felt compelled to see what it held. Flipping through the pages, I found new entries that hadn't been there before. The handwriting was different, sloppier, almost frantic, and the words made my stomach turn. The binding is temporary. It grows stronger each time. We can only delay it. The veil is breaking. My chest tightened as I read the final line scrawled at the bottom of the page. Jason, it knows you. The notebook slipped from my hands, hitting the floor with a dull thud. The air in the room suddenly felt heavier, colder, and a familiar hum began to resonate in my ears. I turned on every light in the apartment, my heart pounding as I scanned the room for shadows that didn't belong. Nothing moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I forced myself to go back to the Society's headquarters. I needed answers. Maren was waiting for me, as if she had known I would come. Her calm demeanor irritated me more than usual, and I didn't bother with pleasantries. "The notebook," I said, slamming it onto the table in front of her. "What does it mean? What do you mean it knows me?" She sighed and leaned back in her chair, folding her hands in her lap. "The White One isn't just another entity," she said. "It's different, stronger, smarter. It doesn't just exist within the veil. It feeds on the connections it makes with the people who encounter it." I felt a chill creep up my spine. "You're saying it? Marked me?" Maren nodded slowly. "In a way, yes. It knows you now. You've seen it, spoken its name, felt its presence. That connection gives it a foothold. The ritual may have sealed the breach for now, but it won't stop the White One completely. It will look for cracks in the veil, for ways to return. And when it does, it will come for you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had done everything they'd asked. Followed the rules, completed the ritual, survived the mission, and yet I was still a target. "So, what do I do?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How do I stop it?" Maren's expression softened, but there was no comfort in her gaze. "You can't," she said simply. "All you can do is stay vigilant, follow the rules, protect the veil, and pray that it doesn't find another way through." The weeks that followed were a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. I stayed in constant contact with the Society, attending meetings, studying the notebook, and participating in more missions. Each one brought me closer to the edge, exposing me to entities and forces that defied logic and reason. But no matter how many rituals I performed or rules I followed, the White One's presence lingered, like a shadow I couldn't escape. I began noticing small things: the hum that filled the air late at night, the faint whispers that seemed to come from the edges of my hearing, the occasional flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. Each time, I reminded myself of the rules. Do not respond. Do not look. Do not stay past dawn. But the longer it went on, the harder it became to tell if I was truly following the rules, or if I was already breaking them. One night, as I sat alone in my apartment, the pocket notebook open in front of me, the whispers returned. They were louder this time, more insistent, and they spoke my name in a voice that was both familiar and alien. "Jason, we see you." I closed the notebook and turned on every light, my heart pounding in my chest. But even in the brightness, the whispers didn't stop. They never do. Even now, I don't know if I made the right choice by joining the Society. I've learned more than I ever wanted to know about the world beyond the veil, but that knowledge comes with a cost. The white one is still out there, waiting, watching, growing stronger, and someday it will return. All I can do is follow the rules and hope that when the time comes, I'm ready.